una byta för någon. någonting om havets spegel, vita moln och vita segel. Inte någon logdans till handklaverets ton. Den handlar inte om bryggorna, vaggorna, myggorna. Inga bränningar som bryts vid reven. Ingenting om Kalle Scheven som fyller fredligt sin kaffekopp med kron. Min sommarfans, vad handlar den om? Ingenting alls, den bara finns där. Vilken stilla krusning, skepan står på kajen. Sommarnattens tjusning putar i kavajen. Flickan från Vinga, hon heter väl Inga, men är det på kvällen så heter hon Ellen. Och finns förut Huldas, Karin och dem, men de sjunger jag ingenting om. Och hör min bedårande sommarvals. Ingen jungfru där på Jungfrusundet, ingen dans på Almagrundet, inget om armar och barmar, om din hals, en sommarvals, om ingenting alls.
Jag hemställer att
May I request His Majesty the King to open the Riksdag session?
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members of the Riksdag, today we are gathered to open the new parliamentary session. These are turbulent times. The Russian aggression towards Ukraine has now entered its third year. And the aggression, as well as the conflict in the Middle East, are very serious. The development leads to a virtually incomprehensible human suffering, as well as extensive material destruction. These conflicts concern us all. Sweden has entered a new security policy era by way of its NATO accession. The membership decision was adopted in broad political agreement. It strengthens our defence capability and it paves the way for still closer cooperation with our Nordic neighbours and other allies. NATO's primary purpose is to secure peace. Here, Sweden can play an important role. Our membership gives us increased opportunities to promote freedom and international security. And this is not just a matter of what we stand to gain, but also of what we may offer protection, support, a voice to the values we safeguard, and of this we can be proud. With this responsibility also follows duties, the duty to defend democracy, in order for future generations to enjoy the same freedom and rights that we enjoy today. Honourable members, in January 1975, I declared the Riksdag session open for the first time under the new order provided for in the then entirely new instrument of government. It is based on the principle that all public power in Sweden proceeds from the people. In a 50-year perspective, we can now declare that it has served us well. However, there is no lack of challenges. Turbulence in the world around us, climate change, financial strain, a healthcare sector under pressure, and gang criminality. Difficulties which require political balances to be made between various different interests in society. Your decisions in this chamber will impact the Swedish people for many years ahead. My hope and conviction is for you to debate respectfully, to listen to each other, and to resolve on the best possible decisions for Sweden. With these words, I wish for you strength, courage, and wisdom for the coming Riksdag session. And I hereby declare the 2024-2025 session of the Riksdag open.
Hur fort blir lönnarna gula som lyser vår vandring i parken? Att dö är att resa en smula från grenen till fasta marken. Hur smal blir den gyllene strimma som bådar att dagen ska randas? Det klämtar en spårvagn i dimman och luften blir tung. blir kinderna vita, så kyss dem med läppar av vatten. Se måsarna textar med krita, en dikt i den svarta natten. Hur snart står popplarna höga och nakna med svärta i strecken. Att dö är helt enkelt att snöa som löv i den muntra väggen. Att dö är helt enkelt att snöa som löv i den muntra bäcken.
Jag hemställer att
I request the Prime Minister to present the statement of government policy. Your Majesties, Your Royal Highnesses, Mr. Speaker, honourable members of the Swedish Riksdag, ladies and gentlemen. There is light on the horizon. Sweden is leaving behind some trying years marked by high inflation, shootings, explosions, an energy crisis, and a protracted security policy limbo. The situation in Sweden and abroad remains serious in many ways, but we're now on more solid ground. Sweden is a NATO member. We have won the fight against inflation. More and more gang-related crimes are being solved, and an unprecedented anti-crime offensive has been initiated. The number of asylum seekers is historically low. Sweden has had a new start in a wide range of areas, from energy policy to school and social policy. The 4 cooperation parties sought and were given a mandate by the voters to set our country on a new course, to bring order to Sweden. And we are delivering on our promises. As we enter the second half of the term of office, the results are starting to show. This is a government that gets things done. For a long time, Sweden had been growing poorer and more dangerous. Now we're on the way to becoming more prosperous and safer. We haven't made considerable progress, but much remains to be done. Almost everyone understands that problems that have built over a long time cannot be solved overnight. The summer's wave of violence reminds us that the fight against organized crime will require extraordinary measures for a very long time. And reversing weak school performances, building new nuclear power plants, and modernizing roads and railways, that will take time as well. A more prosperous and safer Sweden cannot be achieved in one term of office, but we are currently laying the groundwork so that in future Sweden will be known for great innovations rather than dangerous child soldiers. Mr. Speaker, the second half of the term of office is beginning, and our policy process is entering a new phase. Now that inflation has been defeated, the government's economic policy will focus on investment for the future and reforms for economic growth. Now that migration has decreased to more sustainable levels, focus will shift towards making sure we have integration that works, creating a community that gives everyone a fair chance, and that emphasizes individual responsibility. And now, when Sweden has become a NATO member, security policy will shape the emerging Nordic NATO. At the same time, the intensive work to implement the political change, of course, for which the government was given a mandate, that continues. A very large number of inquirers will now be dealt with and used as a basis of reforms that will make a difference in people's everyday lives. I hope for broad support for our policy in pursuit of a more prosperous and safer Sweden. But it cannot be those who want the least who set the pace. The government has stepped up the pace of reforms for good reason. Order must urgently be restored in Sweden. That is how we will continue to govern with perseverance and with a sense of urgency, with Sweden's best interests in mind and driven by the task of building a better future for our children and grandchildren.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, the government has launched its largest ever offensive against organised crime. As each month passes, it's becoming increasingly difficult to be a criminal in Sweden. This past year, the police and prosecutors have been given a number of new tools to prevent and solve crime, including precautionary coercive measures, stop and search zones and restraining orders. And it will be easier to confiscate criminals' proceeds of crime, like money, cars and expensive watches, and that will serious impact on gang leadership. The government will continue to implement groundbreaking reforms at the same rapid pace. No task is more important than pushing back against the systemic threat posed by organised crime, to break the culture of silence and solve more crimes. And this fall we'll have a bill on anonymous witnesses. Investment in more cameras continues. The police overall surveillance capability is being enhanced, and we're working with legislative amendments granting the police access to traffic cameras and automatic vehicle registration plate recognition. But this is not enough when children are constantly being socialized into organized crime. What Sweden is experiencing is extreme in terms of grave crime. Children are being lured into taking on murder assignments via social media, put in taxis headed to addresses in other parts of the country where they shoot to kill. The government is mobilizing to stop this trend. Clearly and early are the guiding words for all these measures. Measures, initiatives for children and families to keep children away from organized crime, and measures targeting the children and young individuals who are already committing serious crime. At the end of the year, the government will present proposals on special prisons for offenders between 15 and 17. The government also wants to impose much more severe penalties on young individuals committing crimes and enable the use of secret coercive measures against children who are involved in serious crime. And in addition, we're looking at the possibility to monitor more young people using electronic ankle tags to help them leave crime behind. Secrecy barriers are being removed so that police, social services and schools can sit at a table and discuss information to prevent the recruitment of children and young people so that they can help to pull them away from the clutches of the gangs. The government has already presented a proposal for an entirely new Social Services Act with a focus on early preventive measures. And this is the beginning of the biggest reform of Swedish social policy in decades. But the crime prevention efforts are much broader than that. Schools and preschools, but also sports and organized leisure activities are crucial for many children's lives. And it all starts with the family, with parental responsibility. support in parental care, family centres and home visit programmes. With these, more children can have a secure childhood, and ultimately it is the society that has a right and an obligation to intervene. Explosions and shootings are the visible part of organised crime, but the oftentimes hidden criminality that attacks welfare systems and infiltrates authorities, that is as much of a systemic threat. Welfare crime threatens democracy and funds criminal networks. Cutting off gangs' financing is therefore a priority for this government, and a large number of reforms are underway. For example, the Swedish Social Insurance Agency and the Swedish Companies Registration Office will be granted new powers to fight crime. Organised crime also exploits financial systems. The government will present proposals to hinder money laundering through hawala transactions, and is maintaining a close dialogue with banks and mobile network operators to stop the defrauding of older people. With the same force that we're fighting organised crime, we're also fighting violence against women, which repeatedly claims lives. The government is implementing a sweeping offensive against men's violence against women, intimate partner violence and honour-based violence. An action programme with 132 items has been presented to make it easier for people to leave abusive relationships. The government is developing a new exit programme, and the tyranny of honour-based oppression, what isolates many women and girls and takes away their freedom, that has to stop, and so-called virginity tests will be prohibited. Mr. Speaker, for decades, Sweden implemented a poorly devised and unsustainable immigration policy in combination with unsuccessful integration policy. We cannot accept Sweden being torn apart by social exclusion, gang violence and parallel societies. Swedish asylum legislation, therefore, must be adjusted to the minimum levels required under EU law, and requirements for family member immigration must be tightened. Our country must be given a chance to become whole again. The government is currently implementing a paradigm shift, and the effects are already clear. The number of asylum seekers has decreased dramatically and is lowest this century. We will implement the EU Pact on Migration and Asylum. According to the minimum levels, better control of the EU external borders will further reduce irregular migration to Sweden and the EU as a whole. The EU recent consensus is important and would not have been possible without Swedish efforts in the European Commission, in the European Parliament, and during the Swedish presidency. We are bringing order to the asylum reception. A key part of this is establishing specific reception centres for asylum seekers to live in, and that will ensure a swift and clear asylum process. A government bill on this subject will be presented the coming months. Major efforts are being made to increase returns and to combat the shadow society, to go underground following rejection in order to be able to then submit a new asylum application should not be possible. The government is drafting a legislative proposal to prevent this and make sure that you leave Sweden if you've been rejected. Voluntary repatriation should also be stimulated and increased. This can help reduce the number of people living in social exclusion and reduce the consequences that social exclusion entails for both Sweden and for the individual. With the right measures, support, information, the number of voluntary returning will increase, particularly among the individuals who for various reasons find that they have not become part of the Swedish society for different reasons, such as inadequate self-sufficiency or Swedish language skills. At the same time, we must be an attractive country for highly qualified workers, foreign researchers and doctoral students. The new fast track has become a great success. Practically all highly qualified workers now receive a reply within 30 days.
Herr talman!
Mr. Speaker, as migration decreases, the focus will be to ensure successful integration. How well we manage with this task will define Sweden as a country in the coming decades. in 10 years, in 20 years from now. For too long, Sweden has implemented a lax integration policy with low expectations on the individual to learn the Swedish language, find employment, and live honorably. We are now changing this. We are stressing the individual's own responsibility to become part of Swedish society, not least by learning Swedish and earning a living. In Sweden, we respect fundamental values in relation to equity and gender equality, individual rights and obligations, and children's position in Swedish society. We're laying the groundwork for introducing a new benefit reform with a benefit ceiling and a gradual qualification into various welfare benefits, and we're introducing stricter requirements for those who want to stay in Sweden and wish to become a Swedish citizen. And the government is also imposing stricter requirements on those studying Swedish for immigrants. A successful integration policy must be based on both demands and opportunities. Too many children grow up in social exclusion marked by language poverty, where Swedish is not spoken. In the coming months during the autumn, the first steps will be taken towards a mandatory language preschool for children who otherwise do not learn Swedish well at home. All children should be able to attend their first day of school full of anticipation, and all children should have every opportunity to succeed in school. A new list of areas of social exclusion will soon be presented in the autumn with a broader focus than the police's existing knowledge base on the situation in vulnerable areas, and this will be an important tool for developing effective measures. Mr. Speaker, we are proud of the Nordic welfare model. General benefits, joint funding, individual freedom of choice, together with a work-first principle. This forms the foundation of some of the world's best welfare societies. It provides security through life's difficulties, but also the freedom to choose our own path. The 4 cooperating parties have supported the welfare system in financially challenging times. This has been a correct and important priority. Sweden's welfare system must be reliable. But welfare involves more than just adding resources from the state. General welfare requires that everyone who's able to work does so, and zero tolerance for any type of abuse of welfare systems. It is successful businesses and individuals' hard work that create the resources our welfare system needs. Sweden has world-class healthcare, but too many people have to wait to access it, and the government is therefore pushing for the regions to increase care capacity. The implementation of a national healthcare referral centre is being accelerated, and the government also plans to introduce a new and enhanced healthcare guarantee with considerably shorter time limits than those that currently apply. Central government responsibility for healthcare needs to increase. Sweden must continue to be at the forefront of cancer care. All children who develop cancer are now offered genetic mapping and precision medicine tailored to each child's individual needs. This is unique. The government is stepping up its efforts for Sweden to achieve its goal of being the first country in the world to eradicate cervical cancer. In the autumn, an updated cancer strategy will be presented. The first stage of a major dental care reform is being implemented. The high cost level protection in dental care is being enhanced for the large demographic of people over 67 years of age, which will be more closely then resemble other forms of healthcare. This will make a difference not only to many people's oral health, but also to their wallets. Sweden must be a safe and secure place to grow old in. The government is continuing its billion-kronor investment in the Care of Older People initiative to train more staff, and steps are also being taken to increase medical expertise in the care of older people and to introduce Swedish language requirements for staff. Personal assistance, which enables a freer life for people with disabilities, must be safeguarded, and for this reason, widespread fraud must be combated. Many people struggle with mental health issues. Hundreds of thousands of people in our country have no close friends to turn to when darkness of the soul descends, and this is a societal problem. Mental illness must be taken just as seriously as physical illness, and During the autumn, a national support line for mental illness will be launched, and in 2025, a national strategy to prevent and counteract involuntary loneliness will be presented. There are a number of indicators which give cause for concern about the well-being of children in Sweden. Inactive lifestyles are on the rise, and children are now suffering from illnesses more commonly only seen in older people, such as fatty liver disease and type 2 diabetes. Teenagers between 13 and 16 years of age spend an average 6.5 hours per day in front of screens, not including their schoolwork. This takes time away from other activities necessary for well-being, sleep, social interaction, physical activity, and many parents are very worried, but they also feel powerless. We will not sit idly by as Swedish children become slaves to algorithms. The government will present proposals to make the school day entirely free of mobile phones, and next year the leisure time card will be introduced, one of many ways to further activate children and young people. What happens in the classroom today determines what Sweden will look like tomorrow, and therefore it is deeply troubling that the Swedish PISA results are sharply declining. 1 in 4 15-year-olds is not even able to read properly. This underscores the need for schools to go back to basics. The government has started to re-establish a strong knowledge-based school system that focuses on fundamentals such as reading, writing, arithmetic. We are moving from screens to books. Order must prevail in the classroom and the school system itself by combating grade inflation and unscrupulous school governing bodies. The government is planning to introduce a bill to increase transparency in independent schools with the aim of counteracting unhealthy driving forces in schools. Mr. Speaker, the fight against inflation has dominated economic policy in the first half of this term of office. High inflation has undermined people's real income, put welfare services under severe strain, and led to bankruptcies and unemployment. The government has therefore pursued a restrained fiscal policy, and at the same time we've provided targeted support to households and our welfare system during these difficult times. We've lowered taxes for both wage earners and pensioners and on petrol and diesel so that people can afford to drive their cars, also in rural areas. The worst is now behind us. Economic policy enters into a new phase. Now is the time to invest in Sweden's future and also to implement reforms that will increase the Swedish growth again. Sweden once made an impressive journey from poverty to wealth, but our welfare cannot be taken for granted. Tomorrow's growth is not secured through subsidies and regulations. Sweden must compete on entirely different qualities: a school system focused on knowledge, excellent research, an innovative business sector, and a good business climate. Large amounts of reliable and affordable fossil-free electricity, a robust infrastructure, and a welfare system we can count on with a strong sense of community. Then Sweden will be able to attract talent and international investments. We must be at the forefront, a small country that punches above its weight. During the autumn, the government will present 3 key bills to realize this vision: a budget bill with a clear focus on investment and growth, an infrastructure bill, and a research and innovation bill. A historic investment is made to upgrade Sweden's infrastructure. The financial framework will be extended by more than 200 billion Swedish kronor, and this is needed as Sweden has an extensive deferred maintenance backlog in the form of potholes in roads and constant train stoppages. Addressing these shortcomings will be a top priority as the government formulates a strategic direction for the forthcoming period 2026 to 2037. But this is also about enabling new investments. Functioning infrastructure is critical to both the business sector's development and the vitality of our cities and rural areas, but ultimately also for the defense of Sweden. Sweden has long been a prominent research and technology nation, and we will continue to be so, but international competition is getting tougher. And for this reason, the government is currently making its largest ever investment in research and innovation. By 2028, this will amount to more than 40 billion Swedish government money, and the research bill will focus on excellence, on research infrastructure, and on cutting-edge new technology. The business community also must continue to be a hive of innovation in order for Sweden to succeed. And few countries have a business community as engaged in research and development. It is a strength that the government and business go hand in hand. And we can do so more often. This is why the government would like to see more of a Team Sweden approach. During the autumn, Mr. Speaker, the AI Commission will present its recommendation, and Sweden has unique possibilities in this area as well. Step by step, one reform at a time, we will improve Swedish growth. The government is expanding its growth support so that the smallest businesses can go from 1 to 2 employees. We are broadening the expert tax category to make it easier to attract highly qualified workers from abroad. The aviation tax entailed a substantial competitive disadvantage for Swedish airports. It is now being scrapped. We are enhancing the incentive to work and strengthening household purchasing power. The government cares about ordinary people's household finances, which is why we're once again lowering taxes for all working people and for the pensioners of this country. In addition, we're exempting investment savings accounts, ISK accounts, up from taxes in 2 stages up to a base level of 300,000 Swedish kronor. This is how we increase ordinary people's freedoms. After a number of tough years, it will once again be possible for people to put away some savings or treat themselves to a little something. The work-first principle needs to be restored. Everyone who can work should work. We have reformed the unemployment insurance scheme to provide more incentive to work, and the government is enhancing its support to people who are particularly far away from the labour market. And many people need to acquire the skills to take the jobs currently available and those that emerge as the economy picks up again, which is why the government is investing in municipal adult education and higher vocational education. Mr. Speaker, solving the energy issue is crucial to our success as an advanced industrial nation, and the decommissioning of half of all nuclear reactors has resulted in a shortage of plannable electricity in southern Sweden. This has cost us dearly. In order to secure the electricity supply and succeed in the climate transition, the government is fundamentally reworking its energy policy. All types of fossil-free energy will be needed. Without energy policy, there is no climate policy. The government is taking action to meet both short and long-term electricity needs. A wind power package is being presented to enhance municipal incentives to expand wind power, where local residents will have a right to compensation, and this will give wind power companies a clear responsibility to compensate municipalities and local residents for wind power's impact on them. The government is also providing investment aid to remove bottlenecks and boost impact, particularly in the southern parts of Sweden. Important steps have been taken to establish a new nuclear program in Sweden, and these efforts are now entering into an intensive phase. The government is continuing work on the recently presented model for risk sharing, and the government is presenting a bill on research and innovation in the field of energy, where research on nuclear power is a particular priority. We're investing in pilot and demonstration projects in the area of nuclear power. Sweden has enormous potential in the climate transition, and the government has therefore, amongst other things, launched a Green Acceleration Office and submitted the first proposals to shorten permit processes. It must be easier to run a business in Sweden. It must be simplified, and this is why the government has established both the Simplification Council and the Implementation Council. No unnecessary rules should burden Swedish business owners and dampen the joy of entrepreneurs' life projects. Housing construction is also hampered by an excessive regulatory burden. The government is simplifying and streamlining the planning and building process so that more housing can be built. More construction measures must be exempt from building permits, and the unreasonable requirements for the design of student housing must also be simplified. Many people dream of living in a house of their own, and the government wants to make that dream possible for more people. And we have, amongst other things, appointed a commissioner for owner-occupied housing. Proposals are being drawn up to create type-approved small houses exempt from building permit requirements. We call it the Sweden House. The government continues to improve the prospects of living and working throughout the country. The development of rural areas is crucial to the success of Sweden as a whole. Business owners in agriculture and forestry need better preconditions to increase their production through enhanced competitiveness and profitability. And the food strategy is being updated. Sweden will be a freer country, and it is often small reforms that make this possible. Farm sales of alcoholic beverages is planned for the first half of 2025. The government is also planning to present proposals for a liberalisation of shore protection along our coastlines so that more people will be able to live near our beautiful waters.
Mr. Speaker, Sweden will pursue an ambitious climate policy with a target of net zero emissions by 2045 at the latest. Sweden has shown that it is possible to reduce emissions by more than 1/3 while doubling the size of the economy at the same time. And this makes us a role model for other countries in the area of climate. Since emissions are cross-border in nature, the solutions have to be as well. Swedish climate policy is best realized within the framework of the EU cooperation. When the whole of Europe makes that transition at the same time, then we'll make a real difference. With the government's measures, Sweden is now expecting to achieve the EU climate targets within the so-called ESR sector, those emissions that are not part of the EU emissions trading system. The new reduction obligation, which also includes fossil-free electricity from public charging stations, is being raised. And at the same time, we reduce taxes on petrol and diesel so that the price at the pump will not increase. And that is how we lay the foundations for a sustainable climate policy with popular support over time. The government is also undertaking other important climate initiatives, including the EV premiums, targeting people in need of support in rural areas, boosting the climate leap, and support to biogas production in agriculture. New technologies play a key role in the climate transition. And as a forestry nation, Sweden has potential to become a world leader in carbon capture, so-called bio-CCS. And the first concrete steps will be taken this fall with a reverse auction for negative emissions. The government is continuing its reform of the forestry policy and is a strong advocate in the EU for protecting vital Swedish interests and ownership rights. Forests are a strategic resource for the climate transition and for Swedish competitiveness alike. The number of wolves in Sweden must decrease. The European Commission has proposed to changing the protection status of wolves, which the government welcomes. We must take care of our land and seas. This includes protecting herring stocks in the Baltic Sea and safeguarding coastal fishing. The government proposes moving the trawling limit to 12 nautical miles from the baseline and that bottom trawling be prohibited in protected marine areas. We want to facilitate hunting on seals and cormorants, which cause problems for coastal fishing. The government is continuing its efforts for effective remediation of sites that have been contaminated by, for example, PFAS, and Sweden is working actively for ambitious EU chemicals legislation and a global agreement on limiting plastic pollution. Mr. Speaker, on March 7, 2024, a new era for Swedish security policy began. After more than 200 years of military non-alignment, Sweden became a NATO member. Sweden has come home to the free world's defense alliance for peace and freedom, home to all our neighbors' security cooperation, home to the group of nations to which we have belonged for a long time. With our accession, Sweden became more secure and NATO became stronger. We bring strategic geography, military capability, and an innovative defense industry into the alliance. All these dimensions underscore the fact that Sweden is a relatively large NATO member. Sweden's NATO integration process is progressing unabated, and the government will propose Sweden's contribution as a reduced battalion to NATO's enhanced forward presence in Latvia during the first half of 2025. We're part of shaping the new NATO in the Nordic region and in Northern Europe. Sweden will meet its burden-sharing obligations in NATO, and we expect other countries to do the same. In the last 4 years, Sweden's defence appropriations have doubled from 60 billion to 124 billion Swedish krona per year, and this growth continues. Next year, Sweden will allocate more than 2.3% of its GDP to military defence. In the coming months, the government will present a bill to the Riksdag on development of the total defence for the period 2025 to 2030. This is based on the Defence Commission's reports, which all parties in the Riksdag generally support. The government notes that there is now broad political consensus on strengthening our defence. The government has paid particular attention to the major needs in civil defence. Historic investments will be made to strengthen Sweden's supply preparedness and also the ability to resist cyber attacks. Russia's full-scale invasion of the Ukraine has catapulted Europe back to the darkest chapters of our history. And support to the Ukraine will be the foremost foreign policy task in the coming years. The free world has a historic duty to resist Russia's expansion of power and help Ukraine win the war.
Tack, den applåden.
Thank you. And that round of applause goes to the Ukraine. We contribute in many ways. 17 support packages have been delivered with the battle tanks, etc. And the government has presented a framework of 75 billion krona for the period 2024 to 2026 to make the support long-lasting and predictable. The government is pushing for additional steps towards Ukraine's EU membership. Sweden is also playing a proactive role to tighten EU sanctions against Russia, including measures against Russian gas, and to use more of the frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. Sweden will support the Ukraine for as long as it takes. Ukraine's cause is our cause. China's conduct towards Taiwan is worrying, and threats of military violence, that's unacceptable. Looming over the Middle East is the threat of a major war where no one knows the full consequences. Israel is being threatened by Iran and its allies on several fronts simultaneously, and Sweden stands up for Israel's right to defend itself in accordance with international law and demands that the hostages be released. In the short term, humanitarian ceasefire is needed to reduce regional tensions and to mitigate the humanitarian disaster in Gaza. In the longer term, Sweden, like the EU and the United States, believes in the idea of a two-state solution in which Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace, freedom, and democracy. The European Union is Sweden's most important foreign policy platform, and it's crucial to Sweden's economy, climate efforts, and global voice. The new Commission and the new Parliament will face major challenges, and Sweden's priorities can be summed up in 4 key areas: war, competitiveness, climate, and crime. Sweden continues to be a proactive and strong advocate as a member state, following its successful presidency of the Council of the EU. Sweden remains a generous donor of development assistance, and the government is setting out a new direction for development assistance policy. Ukraine is now Sweden's single largest recipient of development assistance. We're increasing our demands for lasting results, effectiveness, and transparency. Development assistance can make a valuable contribution, but significantly more needs to be done to reduce poverty. Democracy, trade, growth are what can ultimately lift countries and their citizens out of poverty. Sweden is a strong voice for free trade. The EU should protect global trade and enter into more free trade agreements. At the same time, the government sees the risks involved in unilateral dependencies and a need to take a stance against different countries having different rules. Mr. Speaker, Sweden must be an open and tolerant society. Our free society must unequivocally stand up to those who wish to exploit our freedom to restrict the freedom of others. Everyone in Sweden must be able to live safely and freely, regardless of religious beliefs or personal convictions, regardless of skin color, and regardless of whom they love. Work has begun on an action plan for equal rights and opportunities for LGBTIQ people. In 2025, 250th anniversary of Jewish life in Sweden will be celebrated. And improving the conditions for Jewish life in our country is a matter of high priority for the government, and a long-term strategy will be developed. Meanwhile, support for remembrance trips to Holocaust memorial sites continue, and there is no place for anti-Semitism in our country. The government accepts no exceptions and no excuses. Free and independent journalism is an indispensable part of the democratic infrastructure. All forms of intimidation, hate, harassment, and violence against journalists are also attacks on an open society. The government has adopted measures to enhance protection of journalists. Public service media must remain independent, and their long-term funding must be maintained. Human rights, including freedom of expression, are a cornerstone of liberal democracy. The government will continue its efforts to secure the release of journalist David Isaac and publisher and poet Gui Minhai.
A vibrant cultural scene is the basis of a creative society. It creates cohesion and it helps to increase understanding of ourselves and others. The government sees the cultural and creative sectors as a new key industry in Sweden, and it's also important to preserve our rich cultural heritage. The Royal Opera has a special status as Sweden's national venue for opera and ballet. Let us protect what holds us together in our country. In many parts of the world, polarization and distrust between people increase, and the tone of public debate is becoming increasingly harsh. Sweden does not need to move in that direction. It is up to us, not least all of us gathered here today. Up to us to set a good example. Let us shoulder this responsibility together. Mr. Speaker, our society still has many major problems left to resolve, but Sweden is rising again. It will take time to bring order to Sweden, and there will be setbacks, but we are now laying the foundations for a brighter future for everyone who lives in this fantastic country. A safer Sweden, where the well-behaved majority take back public space from criminal gangs. A wealthier Sweden, where small dreams of a cottage holiday or perhaps a puppy can be realized, and where big dreams of a world-leading technology and a welfare nation are once again possible. A more considerate Sweden, where we care about one another and feel pride that we all share in our society, regardless of where in the world we come from. A more responsible Sweden, where we ask not only what others can do for us and for me, rather what I can do for others. A freer Sweden, where entrepreneurs dare to invest and where the state will provide the security that freedom requires, and where falling in love is a desire, a promise, never a threat of ensuing punishment in the name of honor. A more industrious and more ambitious Sweden, where children lose themselves in books and reading, and more adults set their alarms to get to work on time. All of this, Mr. Speaker, is within reach. It will not come for free, not without effort, and not without us committing to it, but we can achieve it together. Sweden has risen before. We have protected what is dear to us and still remain curious about all those things that can be even better. Let us do this again. Tomorrow will be a better day.
Allra sist, herr talman.
And finally, by way of conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I would like, as a thank you for the patience you've all shown, report the following changes to the Riksdag on the composition of the government. Minister for Foreign Affairs in the Prime Minister's office, Jessica Rosenkrantz. Minister for Foreign Affairs and Head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Malmer Stenegård. Minister for Migration in the Ministry for Justice, Johan Forsell. External Trade and International Cooperation, Minister Benjamin Dousa. Minister for Education and Head of the Education Ministry, Johan Persson. And finally, Labour Market and Integration Minister and Head of the Labour Market Ministry, Mats Persson.
Följa med, vill du ha en paus från storstadens brus, från trängsel och kaos? Låt mig ta dig med ut bland koppar och skär. Vi seglar ut dit vindarna bär. Jag vill ha dig med i min havsmelodi. Nu passar vi på, sen är sommaren förbi. Så kastar vi loss och ger oss av. Vi sätter segel på öppet hav. Och gungar sakta fram när havet förför. Vinden är varm när vi surfar med slör. Båten är stuvad med delikatesser. Som det ska vara på en skärgårdssemester. Vi lägger till i en vacker hamn. Finner ett skydd i naturens famn. så får du se hur jag angör en brygga där vi kan ligga och känna oss trygga. Tänk att en skimrande sommarkväll vara vi två på en skärgårdshäll. När solen gått ner bakom muddar och gött så går vi ombord då har kväll blivit något. Kom ner i kajutan in i en koj. Där kan vi njuta och ha lite skoj. Sen vaknar vi upp till en svalkande bris och tänk att få vara i ett havsparadis. Så kastar vi loss och ger oss av. Vi sätter segel på öppet hav och gungar sakta fram när havet förför. Vinden är far när vi surfar med slör. Båten är stuvad med delikatesser som det ska vara på en skärgårdssemester. Vi lägger till i en vacker hamn, finner ett skydd i naturens famn. Så får du se hur jag angör en brygga där vi kan ligga och känna oss trygga. Tänk att en skimrande sommarkväll vara vi två på en skärgårdshäll. Så somnar vi in av vindarnas suckar som sjunger godnatt. Små vågor som kluckar, sjunger godnatt. Små vågor som kluckar, sjunger godnatt. Små vågor godnatt.